When I was 12, my family drove off without me at a rest stop. Not by mistake, not really. My dad laughed as the car rolled forward. My mom smiled tight-lipped from the passenger seat, and my older brother clapped his hands like it was some kind of family prank. "Let's see if he can catch up," Dad yelled through the open window, and then they were gone. I still remember the dust cloud rising from the tires and the taste of cheap cola in my mouth as I stood there holding the plastic bottle, staring at the empty stretch of highway. My name's Alex. I'm 34 now, and I don't think that moment ever really left me. It wasn't just being left behind. It was realizing I was always the one they thought was disposable. The quiet one, the overthinker, the kid who just doesn't get jokes. That day, something in me shifted. I stopped trying to make them proud, or even to make them see me. I just stopped needing them. Back then, we were driving from Michigan to Florida for a family trip, the kind of road trip that looks perfect in photos but feels like walking barefoot over glass. My dad, Richard, was the loud, commanding type. He loved being in charge of every conversation, every plan, every joke. My mom, Elaine, lived in his shadow, not unhappily, more like she believed his loudness made him right. And my brother, Ethan, 2 years older, was their golden boy. He was athletic, charming, everything I wasn't. If I got an A, it was expected. If he got a B, it was still better than most. That morning, before they left me at the rest stop, Dad had already been in one of his moods. I'd asked to stop because I wasn't feeling well. We'd been driving for hours and I'd barely spoken, which he somehow found annoying. "You're moping again," he said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You know, life's not gonna wait for you, son. Maybe smile once in a while." "I just need a bathroom break," I muttered. Ethan smirked. "You always need something, don't you?" They stopped at a gas station/rest stop just off the highway. I ran in, used the bathroom, and when I came out, they were sitting in the car with the engine idling. I was walking back when Dad suddenly shouted to Ethan, "Go, go, go," like it was a race. Ethan floored it. I didn't even run after them at first. I genuinely thought they'd circle back. I waited 5 minutes. 10. 15. The clerk inside the shop saw me sitting outside and asked if I was okay. I told him my parents were coming back. He gave me a Sprite and said, "All right, champ, you sit tight." But they didn't come back. Not after 20 minutes. Not after an hour. Eventually, a highway patrol officer pulled in, and that's when I realized they weren't joking. They had actually left me behind. When the officer called it in, they finally turned around, 2.5 hours later. Dad stepped out laughing. "Would you believe he was just sitting here waiting? Guess we raised a patient kid." He slapped my shoulder hard, like it was all good fun. The officer looked at him like he wanted to say something, but didn't. I didn't say anything either. That silence became my weapon. Over the years, whenever they mocked me, for being quiet, for staying in my room, for wanting to draw instead of play football, I just went silent. Not out of fear, out of something colder. Detachment. I started saving everything. Energy, emotion, focus, for myself. In high school, while Ethan was getting applause for scoring touchdowns, I was working part-time at a library. My parents never came to see me get any awards or recognitions. "It's not like reading is an achievement," Dad said once. "You're supposed to read." When Ethan got a driver's license, they bought him a car. When I got mine, Dad tossed me the keys to his rusted pickup and said, "Try not to wreck it." By the time I turned 18, I'd already planned my exit. I got a scholarship, not from their help, but from a teacher who believed in me enough to push my portfolio to a design competition. I left home the day after graduation. They didn't even drive me to college. "If you're going to be independent," Dad said, "then go ahead. Let's see how far you get." Funny thing, that became the story of my life. Let's see how far you get. Turns out, pretty far. But back then, I didn't know that yet. I was just a broke kid with a duffel bag, a laptop, and a quiet promise to myself: never depend on them again. In college, I studied architecture and business on dual majors. I worked nights at a cafe and freelanced on design projects online. Sometimes, I'd see other students' parents visiting with care packages, hugs, and homemade food. Mine never called unless it was for something. Usually money. "Hey, champ," Dad would start, his tone fake sincere. "Your mom's car needs some repairs, and since you're off on your own now, maybe you can pitch in. Family helps family, right?" When I said no, the silence on the line would stretch until he sighed and hung up. I didn't care anymore. Years passed like that. I built my reputation through work, took risks, and started my own architectural firm at 29. At first, it was just me in a rented office the size of a storage unit. But word got around. I was good, methodical, precise, innovative. By 32, I'd landed government contracts and partnerships with major firms across the country. And then one morning, out of nowhere, I got a voicemail from my brother. I hadn't heard from him in years. "Hey, Alex," he said, his tone casual but uneasy. Mom and Dad are coming into town. They wanted to talk to you. Something about catching up, maybe dinner?" I didn't call back. Then, 2 weeks later, I walked into my office, the new one, the 23rd floor of a downtown glass building, and the receptionist looked nervous. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "there are 2 visitors asking for you. They say they're your parents." I froze. For a moment, all the air in the room felt heavy. I told her to send them up. When the elevator doors opened, it was like stepping into a memory I didn't ask for. My father looked older, but still carried that self-importance in his stride. My mother's smile was nervous, the kind of smile she used when she wasn't sure what to say. "Alex," Dad said, like he was greeting a business contact. "Wow, look at this place. You've done well for yourself." Mom's eyes watered as she whispered, "We didn't know who you'd become." I didn't say anything yet. I just looked at them, standing in my lobby. The same people who once left me on the side of the highway like a forgotten suitcase. The same people who laughed when I asked for help, who told me I'd never make it without them. And now they were here. Not for love, not for apology. I could see it in their eyes. They needed something, and I was about to find out what. Dad started pacing around my office like he owned the place. His hands were tucked into his pockets, chin tilted high, like he was inspecting a property he might buy, not visiting the son he hadn't spoken to in a decade. "Damn," he muttered, scanning the glass walls and framed design models. "You really did all this? On your own?" "Yes," I said flatly. Mom smiled too brightly. "We're so proud of you, honey. We always knew you'd do great things." The words felt hollow. They weren't proud, they were surprised. Shocked, even. Because in their world, I was the quiet, awkward one who'd never make it without them. They used to joke about it at family dinners. "Ethan will build something, Alex will read about it," Dad would say, and everyone would laugh. Now here they were, in my office, standing in front of a skyline I designed. "Why are you here?" I finally asked. Dad cleared his throat. "Can't a father visit his son?" "You could have done that 20 years ago," I said. "You didn't need a skyscraper for that." He chuckled, pretending not to notice the edge in my voice. "Still got that temper, huh? I was hoping success would calm you down a bit." Mom touched his arm lightly, trying to steer the conversation. "We just thought maybe it's time to reconnect. Life's short, you know. Your brother has been saying how much he misses you." That made me laugh, quietly, but bitterly. "Ethan? Miss me?" The last time he texted me, it was to ask if I could help him out with a quick loan for his new startup. Then he blocked me when I said no. Mom's smile twitched, but she kept it on. "He was just embarrassed, that's all. He made some mistakes. And I was the mistake he grew up being compared to." I interrupted. There was a silence thick enough to choke on. I could see them both struggling to decide whether to double down or back off. Dad, of course, doubled down. "Don't be dramatic, Alex," he said with a scoff. "We treated you both the same. Maybe if you'd been more outgoing, you'd have gotten more attention." Ethan knew how to make people like him. That's not favoritism, that's personality. I leaned back in my chair. "Right. Leaving me at a gas station. That was a personality test then?" Mom's lips parted, her eyes flicking nervously to Dad. He looked caught off guard for half a second, then smirked. "Oh, come on. You're not still hung up on that. You were fine. We came back, didn't we?" "You left me there for hours," I said quietly. "I was 12. He shrugged. "And look how it turned out. Made you stronger, didn't it?" That one sentence summed him up perfectly. He could twist cruelty into wisdom with the same ease he used to twist a bottle cap. Mom looked down at her hands. "We made mistakes," she murmured. "But you've done so well, and we just wanted to be part of your life again." "Why now?" I asked. "After all this time?" She hesitated. Dad didn't. "Because your mother and I are retiring," he said. "And the family business, the hardware stores, aren't doing as great as they used to. Ethan's been struggling to keep them running. We thought maybe you could help bring in some modern ideas, maybe some funding." There it was. The real reason. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not out of amusement, but disbelief. So, this isn't about family. It's about money. Dad's face tightened. Don't twist things, Alex. This is about opportunity. You have influence now. You could help us rebuild the Carter legacy. Carter legacy, I repeated, shaking my head. You mean the same legacy that told me I was a disappointment for studying design instead of taking over your stores? The one that laughed when I said I wanted to build my own company. Mom reached out, voice trembling slightly. We didn't understand back then. You were just so distant. I was distant because you made sure I never felt wanted, I said. You gave Ethan everything. Cars, tuition, connections. I got lectures about being grateful for scraps. Dad slammed his hand on my desk suddenly, startling even himself. Don't talk to your mother like that. I stayed perfectly still. You don't get to decide how I talk anymore. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioner. Mom started crying quietly. Dad just stared at me with that old fire, the same one that used to make me shrink as a kid. Only now, it didn't scare me. Finally, he straightened his tie and said, "You've changed." Yes, I said. That was the point. They left shortly after. I watched them go through the glass walls, their reflections fading as the elevator doors closed. I thought that would be the end of it. But that was just the beginning. A few days later, I got a call from my brother. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. "Hey man, I heard Mom and Dad came by. That's great. Maybe we can all meet soon. Listen, I've got this new expansion idea for the stores. We're looking for investors, and I think it could be good PR for your firm, too. Win-win, right? Call me. Win-win." The same words Dad used when he wanted something from me. I didn't call him back either. The next week, I started getting messages from extended family, uncles, aunts, even cousins I hadn't seen since childhood. "It's so nice to hear you're reconnecting," one wrote. "Your parents are so proud." Proud. That word again. They must have been telling everyone we'd patched things up, painting a nice family picture. Meanwhile, they were scheming behind the scenes. I found out how deep it went 2 weeks later when my accountant called. "Alex," he said, "did you authorize a $75,000 transfer to Carter Hardware Holdings?" I nearly dropped my coffee. "What?" He explained that someone had submitted a request using an old email address that used to belong to me years ago, one linked to a joint family account I'd forgotten even existed. It wasn't active anymore, but somehow they'd managed to tie it to my name and push through a transaction request. Luckily, my accountant had paused it, sensing something off. I knew immediately who it was. That night, I called Dad. He answered like nothing was wrong. "Hey son, long time no talk. You tried to take 75 grand from me," I said calmly. He sighed. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a business transfer. Ethan said you were helping." "I never said that." "Maybe you forgot," he said casually. "Anyway, the money's just temporary. We'll pay it back once things stabilize." My blood went cold. They were stealing from me. Again. Only this time it wasn't emotional, it was financial. "Dad," I said slowly, "if you ever touch a cent of mine again, I will treat you like any other thief. You understand?" He laughed. "Come on, Alex. Don't act like you're some kind of big shot now. You wouldn't even have half of what you do if I hadn't taught you hard lessons growing up. Like being left on the side of the road." I said. He went silent, then hung up. I sat in my office long after that, staring out at the city lights. For years, I'd convinced myself that cutting them off was enough, that walking away meant I'd won. But now, they were back, clawing their way into my world again, pretending to care while looking for ways to use me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since that day on the highway. Not sadness, not even anger. Resolve. Because if they wanted to play games, I'd learned from the best. And I wasn't 12 anymore. 3 weeks passed after that call. 3 quiet, deceptive weeks where I told myself the storm was over. I went back to focusing on work, signing 2 major contracts, barely sleeping, living off coffee and momentum. But somewhere deep down, I knew it wasn't done. My father was the kind of man who never let go of control, not until he'd burned every bridge and blamed the ashes for catching fire. Then one morning, my assistant walked into my office holding a manila envelope. "This came by courier," she said. "No return address." Inside were photocopies of legal documents, not fake ones, but real ones. They had my name on them, my signature, even my company's letterhead. The problem? I'd never signed them. It was a partnership agreement between my firm and Carter Hardware Holdings. The papers claimed that I'd agreed to invest $250,000 into their expansion project, and that I'd pledged part of my company's profits as backing. My throat went dry as I flipped through the pages. The signatures weren't obvious forgeries. They were eerily perfect, down to the smallest swoop of my signature. Someone had traced or digitally copied it. I called my lawyer immediately. "Alex," she said, scanning the PDFs I forwarded. "If these get filed, they could tie you up in litigation for months. You need to shut this down immediately." I knew exactly who did it. That evening, I drove to their house. Not my childhood home. They'd sold that years ago, but a new one in a quiet suburb. The kind of place where the neighbors keep trimmed lawns and forced smiles. As I pulled up, I saw Dad's truck in the driveway and Ethan's shiny SUV parked beside it. When I stepped out, Mom opened the door before I could even knock. She looked startled, guilty. "Alex," she said softly, "you shouldn't have come without calling." "Where's Dad?" I said. "In the den." I walked past her without another word. The den was exactly how I expected. Old family photos, a massive TV, and Dad sitting in his recliner like a king holding court. Ethan was beside him, sipping a beer. "Well," Dad said, not looking surprised at all. "Guess you found out." "You forged my signature," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The quiet made it worse. Dad leaned back, crossing his arms. "Technically, it was Ethan who filled out the paperwork. We were just speeding up the process. You were going to help anyway, weren't you?" "No," I said. "And you both know that." Ethan shrugged. "Come on, man, it's not a big deal. We're family. It's not like we're stealing. We just needed to move quickly to secure some suppliers, and your name carries weight. It's business." "Forgery is not business," I said sharply. "You could have destroyed everything I built." Dad waved a hand dismissively. "Stop overreacting. You've always had this chip on your shoulder, like the world's out to get you. You could have helped your family and been a hero. Instead, you're acting like a victim again." That word, victim, hit me like ice water. He'd used it my whole life. Whenever I got hurt, whenever they crossed a line, whenever I dared to stand up for myself. Victim. I took a deep breath. "You're going to destroy those documents." "Now." "Already done," he said smoothly. "But the investors saw them. They think you're part of the deal. You'll look real petty if you pull out now." My hands tightened into fists at my sides. "You used my name to get investors?" "Relax," Ethan said, smirking. "We told them you're backing us. It's good for the brand. You should be thanking us for the exposure." Exposure. They were using me. Again, this time as a golden ticket to credibility. Mom finally stepped in, voice trembling. "Richard, maybe this went too far." "Stay out of this," Dad snapped. "He's been ungrateful his whole life. You'd think after everything I've done for him, he'd show a little loyalty." I turned to him. "What exactly did you do for me, Dad? Besides teach me how to be alone?" The room went silent. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say a word. Dad's face hardened. "You want to know what I did for you? I gave you a roof, food, a name. You think you made yourself? Every part of you, your work ethic, your grit, came from me. That day at the rest stop, you think I just drove off for no reason? I was teaching you something." I stared at him, stunned. "You meant to do it?" He didn't blink. "You were soft. Always crying. Always needing attention. So yeah, I left you there. I wanted to see if you'd man up and find your way back. And you did, didn't you?" Mom gasped quietly, but he just leaned back in his chair, satisfied with his twisted logic. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. The room spun with memories. All the moments I'd brushed off, all the cruelty I'd excused as jokes or parenting. And now he'd said it outright. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. I wasn't left behind. I was tested. Something inside me broke then, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, irreversible one. The last fragile thread that connected me to them just snapped. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked softly. "You traumatized your own kid and call it a lesson?" Dad smirked. "Worked, didn't it? You're rich now. Strong. You should be thanking me." Ethan chuckled. "He's right, man. You turned out fine." "Fine." I repeated. "You call years of silence fine? You call cutting out your family fine? You think success replaces what you broke?" Dad sighed, annoyed. "Here we go? The pity parade. You've always got to make yourself the martyr, don't you? Maybe if you stopped playing the victim, you'd see we're trying to rebuild something here." That word again. I turned to leave, but Dad's voice stopped me cold. "If you walk out that door, "Don't come back," he said. "You're either part of this family or you're against it." I didn't turn around. Then I guess I've been against it my whole life. I left without looking back. But the real betrayal didn't end there. The next week, I got a call from one of my firm's biggest clients. "Alex," the man said cautiously, "I just received some concerning information from Carter Holdings. They're claiming your company's under investigation for fraud." My stomach dropped. "What?" "They sent us documents showing you misused funds. If that's true, we'll need to suspend our contract." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Fraud? That was impossible. My company's books were spotless. I asked him to forward the documents, and when I saw them, I almost couldn't believe it. They'd taken my old forged signature and created a fake paper trail, invoices, receipts, and statements that made it look like I had been siphoning money to fund my parents' failing business. It was strategic, deliberate, and malicious. They knew exactly what they were doing. My lawyer confirmed it. If these circulate, it could destroy your reputation. You need to go public with your side before this spreads. But part of me hesitated. Not because I doubted what I should do, but because I wanted to understand how far they'd go. Would my own family really try to ruin me? A few nights later, I got my answer. I received an email from an anonymous account with no name, just one sentence. "You should have helped us when you had the chance." Attached was a scan of the forged documents. And beneath that, a photo. It was a picture of 12-year-old me, sitting on the curb at that rest stop, knees pulled to my chest, holding that empty bottle of cola. I don't know who took it, maybe mom through the window, maybe dad himself. But seeing it now, decades later, attached to a threat, that's when I realized this wasn't just greed. It was control. They wanted to break me again. Only this time, I wasn't the scared kid on the highway. I was the one holding the keys. The week that followed was the hardest of my life since the day they left me on that highway. Except this time, it wasn't a deserted gas station that made me feel abandoned. It was watching my reputation, the thing I'd built from nothing, start to crumble in front of me. It began slowly, like hairline cracks in glass. A few clients postponed meetings. A city council project that had taken me 2 years to secure suddenly went under review. My name started popping up in industry gossip threads online. Whispers about fraud, shady family deals, suspicious transfers. None of it was true, but that didn't matter. In business, perception is truth. I remember sitting in my office late one night, the city outside dark except for the red pulse of taillights below. My assistant, Ava, stood by the door with her laptop. "You should go home," she said softly. I didn't look up. "If I go home, I'll just stare at the ceiling." She hesitated, then said, "I've been with you 5 years. I know you didn't do this, but you need to fight back. People are talking, Alex." I nodded numbly. I knew she was right. But what do you do when the people you're fighting are the ones who raised you? When the enemy has your last name? Every night, I replayed their words in my head. Dad's smug tone, Ethan's careless smirk, that photo of 12-year-old me, their trophy. I couldn't get it out of my mind. Who keeps something like that for 22 years? Who looks at that and feels pride instead of guilt? That photo wasn't just a memory. It was proof. Proof that I had been nothing more than a pawn in their twisted lessons about tough love. The more I thought about it, the more it sank in. My father hadn't raised sons. He'd raised extensions of himself. Tools. Ethan was the golden child because he reflected Dad's charm and arrogance. I was the failure because I didn't play along. I'd spent my whole life running from that truth, trying to outwork the pain, to build something big enough to drown it. But no matter how tall my buildings got, the foundation underneath was still cracked. And now they were exploiting it again. The next morning, my lawyer, Janet, called. "Alex, we need to talk." They filed an official civil claim, alleging financial misconduct. It's baseless, but it's enough to freeze your corporate accounts temporarily. "Freeze," I said, barely breathing. "Yes, until it's reviewed. It'll take at least a few weeks to clear." A few weeks. That might as well have been a lifetime in my industry. Delays meant penalties. Penalties meant cancellations. I could lose everything I'd built over a lie. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the glass window. The skyline looked distorted, like it was bending under invisible weight. That day, I went home early, something I never did. My apartment was sleek, minimalist, quiet. Too quiet. I poured a drink and sat on the couch, staring at the framed blueprint of my first building. The one that had put me on the map. I used to think that blueprint represented freedom. Now, it just reminded me of what I stood to lose. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Next time, think twice before turning your back on family. Another message followed, seconds later. Dad says maybe this will teach you humility. No name, but I didn't need one. I knew that tone, that arrogance. Ethan. I dropped the phone on the table, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't fear, it was anger. A kind of deep, steady anger that sits behind your ribs and grows quietly. That night, I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of being 12 again, sitting on that curb, watching the car disappear. Only this time, when I looked up, the headlights coming back toward me weren't to rescue me. They were chasing me. I woke up before dawn, drenched in sweat. And something in me just changed. I realized I couldn't keep reacting. I'd been on the defensive my entire life. That's what they wanted. For me to always play catch-up, to explain myself, to justify existing. So I stopped. Instead of calling lawyers or arguing or posting statements, I went silent. I stopped taking meetings, stopped answering calls, stopped replying to texts. My staff was confused, the investors were restless, but I needed space. Not to run away, but to think. Silence was always my weapon. In those quiet days, I did what I've always done best. I observed. I started gathering everything. Old emails, contracts, family correspondence, even bank records from when I was younger. I wasn't sure yet what I was looking for, but I had a feeling. People like my father always leave traces. I also reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Mrs. Lewis, my old high school teacher, the one who'd helped me apply for that scholarship. She'd been the first adult to ever tell me I had talent. When she answered the phone, her voice was warm. Alex Carter, I can't believe it's you. I've seen you on the news, in magazines. Goodness, you've done so well. Trying to, I said, forcing a smile. I need a favor, actually. Do you still have those old records from the scholarship application? The recommendation letters? I think I do, she said after a pause. Why? I just need to revisit a few things from back then. It took 2 days, but she sent them. I don't know why, but opening that envelope felt like opening a time capsule. There were pages of handwritten notes, her recommendation, my essay, copies of letters she'd exchanged with my parents at the time. And that's when I found it. A letter from my father. Alex isn't very social or hardworking, but perhaps this program will teach him discipline. We've done our best to toughen him up, but he's sensitive and doesn't understand responsibility yet. He'd written that to a scholarship committee. About his own son. I sat there for a long time, reading that line over and over. All those years, I thought he just didn't believe in me. But this was active sabotage. Even when I'd tried to leave, he'd been trying to clip my wings. Suddenly, the pattern became clear. It wasn't just control, it was envy. My father didn't want me to fail out of disappointment. He wanted me to fail because my success made him small. For the first time in my life, I saw him for what he was. Not a giant, not a teacher, not a man with lessons. Just a bitter, insecure bully who couldn't stand that the son he mocked had built something without him. I started connecting dots. Every accident, every lesson, every favor, all threads in the same web. He'd done it to Ethan too, in a different way, feeding him just enough validation to make him dependent, while cutting me down so I'd never look back. And now, both of them were trapped in that same pattern, still trying to control me, still mistaking silence for weakness. That night, I went back to the office for the first time in days. I turned off the lights, poured another coffee, and started making a plan. Not revenge, not yet. Just a recovery plan. First, I called Janet and told her to start filing counterclaims for defamation and fraud. We'll play the long game, I said. Don't rush. Just build quietly. Then I reached out to a contact I'd met years ago, a private investigator who specialized in financial tracing. I want everything, I told him. Every loan, every hidden asset, every forged document, every time my name shows up in their books. He hesitated. That'll take time. I have time, I said. Just not patience. And finally, I wrote a letter. Not to send, not yet. Just to get it out of my system. It started like this. You told me being left behind would make me stronger. You were right. But you should have been more careful what kind of strength you created. When I finished writing, I folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. The anger was still there, but it wasn't wild anymore. It was steady, controlled. The kind that doesn't explode, it plans. The next few days were quiet. My accounts remained frozen, some clients left, but others stayed. My closest staff stood by me. The investigator began sending reports, fragments of information, bits of paper trails. A transfer here, a falsified invoice there. Small things, but enough to hint at something bigger. And then, one afternoon, I got an email from him with just 3 words. You were right. Attached was a PDF, a scanned document from my father's company archives, an old memo, dated 10 years ago. Contingency plan. Leverage Alex's firm when possible. His brand value will increase investor confidence. Keep personal contact minimal until useful. I read it twice, then 3 times. My chest felt hollow. They hadn't just used me recently. They'd been planning it for a decade. That was the moment I stopped calling it betrayal. It was something colder, sharper. A long con disguised as family. And if they'd spent 10 years preparing their move, then so would I. Because from here on, I wasn't playing defense anymore. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that once you're down there, you stop being afraid of falling. There's nowhere lower to go. The silence, the isolation, it hardens you. And that's what happened to me in those weeks after I discovered that memo. Something inside me solidified. The anger cooled into clarity. The hurt became strategy. I woke up one morning before sunrise, looked out over the skyline I'd helped shape, and told myself out loud, "You're not the scared kid on the curb anymore. You're the one driving now." From that day forward, I treated the situation like any other architectural problem, something that looked impossible until you broke it down into pieces. Structure, foundation, leverage. The first step was to regain control of my firm. The freeze on my accounts was still active, but my lawyer, Janet, was relentless. "We're going to bleed them dry with facts," she said during one late-night call. "They forged your name, manipulated records, and filed false claims. That's not a business dispute, Alex. That's criminal intent." Within 2 weeks, she'd secured an emergency injunction. The freeze was lifted, and my accounts were restored. The news didn't spread instantly, which was perfect. I didn't want anyone to know I was recovering. Not yet. While my family thought I was drowning, I was quietly rebuilding and documenting every lie they'd told along the way. I started reaching out to contacts in the industry, people I'd worked with over the years, CEOs, developers, even city planners. I didn't tell them what was going on, not directly. I just reconnected, asked about projects, offered collaboration. To them, it looked like I was expanding my network. But in truth, I was reinforcing my foundation, making sure that even if rumors lingered, my reputation stayed anchored in personal trust. "Alex," one of them said during a meeting, "you've always been the quiet guy who gets things done. People talk, but we know better." That was the moment I realized something important. Credibility doesn't come from your name being clean. It comes from your work speaking louder than the noise. Meanwhile, my private investigator kept sending me gold. He uncovered shell companies my father had been running, fake invoices used to pull money from their investors, and several email chains showing Ethan forwarding my business contacts to potential partners, meaning potential victims. Every document I received made the picture clearer. They weren't just desperate, they were reckless. Their entire empire was built on borrowed time and stolen trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent years mocking me for being soft, and yet I'd built something real. They'd spent years chasing shortcuts and were now tangled in their own lies. But instead of striking back immediately, I focused on growing. That was the sweetest kind of revenge, quiet success in plain sight. I expanded my firm into 2 new cities. I hired additional architects, launched a mentorship program, and partnered with an environmental design foundation. The projects that had been under review started returning once the injunction became public record. And when one of my former clients called to apologize for doubting me, I just said, "No hard feelings. Let's build something better." Behind every polite smile, I was setting the stage. By early spring, the investigator had enough evidence to crush their operation completely, but I wasn't ready to end it yet. I wanted to do it cleanly, not out of spite, but out of principle. I wanted them to feel what they'd made me feel my entire life: powerless. That's when I had an idea. Carter Hardware Holdings was still active, but barely. They'd been bleeding money for years and were surviving on loans. Loans that were, as I discovered, secured by false statements and overvalued assets. That meant if I could quietly expose one of those false claims, just one, the lenders would swarm like sharks. So I called a contact at a private equity firm I'd worked with on a housing project. Let's call him Mason. He had connections in finance and, more importantly, a sense of poetic justice. Mason, I said over dinner one night, hypothetically speaking, if a company was falsifying their asset value to get loans, what would happen if that information reached the lender? He grinned. They'd be done. Collateral calls, credit recall, the works. Why? You looking to make someone sweat? I smiled. Let's just say I'm looking to level a playing field. He raised his glass. Then I'd make sure the truth lands in the right inboxes. Over the next month, that's exactly what happened. A series of anonymous reports landed at the banks holding Carter Hardware's loans. They weren't rumors. They were facts, backed by documentation the investigator had found. False valuations, hidden debts, illegal fund transfers. It didn't take long for the dominoes to start falling. The first hit came quietly. My brother called me late one evening, his voice tight. You hear what's happening? I played dumb. No. Should I have? The banks are freezing everything, he said. Dad's losing it. He thinks someone's sabotaging us. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I meant it. Not because I pitied him, but because I wanted him to feel every second of confusion and panic I'd felt when they froze my accounts. A few days later, local news picked up the story. Family business faces allegations of fraudulent accounting, the headline read. It was buried in the finance section, nothing flashy, but it spread fast enough. Within a week, suppliers cut ties, investors pulled out, and my father's empire, the Carter legacy he'd always bragged about, started to collapse. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything online or call to rub it in. I just worked. I rebuilt. I thrived. But there was one more thing I needed to do before the storm hit them fully. I wanted to understand why. So, I drove back to that same suburb one evening. It was raining hard, fitting really. Their driveway was empty except for my dad's old truck. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Dim lights flickered through the blinds. When my mom opened the door, she looked 10 years older. Her hands trembled when she saw me. Alex, that's late. What are you doing here? I just came to ask one thing, I said quietly. Why didn't you stop him? Her eyes filled with tears instantly. I tried, she whispered. You don't know how loud he gets, how angry. I was 12, I said, cutting her off. You could have opened the door. You could have said stop. She looked down. He said it was for your own good. Of course he did. From the living room, I heard the TV flick off. My father's voice followed. If you're here to lecture me, don't bother. He appeared in the doorway, still proud even as the walls around him crumbled. His face was red, his voice sharp. You think you won, don't you? You think your money makes you better? No, I said calmly. I think honesty does. He stepped closer, sneering. You'll regret this. You've always been ungrateful. Everything you are, I made you. I met his stare evenly. Then maybe that's your biggest mistake. For once, he didn't have a comeback. Just silence. I turned to leave, but before I stepped out, I glanced over my shoulder and said, You should check tomorrow's papers. Then I left him standing there, mouth half open, the king watching his castle sink into the mud. By the time morning came, the story had exploded. Investigators, auditors, even government regulators had launched inquiries into Carter Hardware Holdings. Their assets were frozen, their properties under review, their licenses suspended. Ethan's phone calls went unanswered, Dad's name disappeared from the local business boards, and the empire they'd built on lies crumbled into dust. Meanwhile, my company, the one they'd tried to destroy, flourished. Investors came back stronger than before, impressed by how I'd handled the storm with professionalism. My team doubled in size, my name was cleared publicly, and an architecture magazine ran a feature titled The Man Who Built Integrity. I kept the article framed on my office wall, not out of vanity, but as a reminder. Every time I saw it, I thought of that 12-year-old kid sitting at the rest stop, waiting for headlights that never came. He'd finally made it. And this time, nobody could drive off without him. When Carter Hardware officially filed for bankruptcy, it made the local paper and a few business blogs. Nothing huge, but enough to sting. I read the article over breakfast, sipping coffee in silence. The reporter called it a tragic collapse of a once proud family business, and even quoted my father saying, "We trusted the wrong people." That part made me laugh. He couldn't even fail without deflecting blame. But that headline wasn't closure, not yet. Their downfall had been financial. My revenge was just beginning. Because now, With the company dead, something strange happened. They needed me. Desperately. A week after the story broke, my office receptionist buzzed me. "There's a Mrs. Carter here to see you," she said cautiously. "She says she's your mother." I hesitated before answering. "Send her up." When Mom walked in, she looked like a ghost. Her makeup was minimal, her eyes red, her voice fragile. "Alex," she said softly, "I know I don't deserve your time, but please, your father's not well. He's lost everything. The house, the stores. Even Ethan moved out." I didn't say anything. She twisted her hands nervously. "He still won't admit it, but he's been calling banks, old friends, even asking about you. I think he wants your help again." I leaned back in my chair. "Does he now?" She nodded. "He said if you could just invest a little, he could rebuild. Start small. Maybe open one store again." I smiled faintly. "And let me guess, Ethan would help run it?" Her silence was answer enough. "Mom," I said slowly, "you came here to ask me to save him, didn't you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand, Alex. He's angry, yes, but he's still your father. He's proud. Too proud to ask himself. But I know he's scared. You're the only one who can fix this." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the skyline. "Do you remember the day you left me at that rest stop?" She covered her mouth. "Please don't. I waited for you," I said. "Hours. I told myself you'd come back because you loved me. But when that car finally pulled in, you didn't even look sorry. You just said, 'Get in, we're late.'" She began to cry quietly. "That was the day I realized what family meant to you and Dad. It meant loyalty one way, up, not down." She whispered. "I was scared of him." "I know," I said. "And that's why I'm not angry anymore." She looked up hopefully. "Because I learned from both of you exactly how fear works." I turned back to her and smiled gently. "Tell Dad I'll help." Her eyes widened. "You will?" "Of course," I said. "But he'll need to meet me personally. One last time. Let him think I'm ready to forgive him." For the first time in weeks, I saw something spark in her expression, relief. "Thank you, Alex. You don't know how much this means." "I do," I said quietly. "Trust me." That night, I called Mason, the same contact who'd helped me tip the banks earlier. "I need one more favor," I said. "Something theatrical." He laughed. "For you? Always. What's the setup?" "I want to offer my father an investment," I said. "Make it look legitimate. He'll think it's a second chance. In reality, it's going to expose him publicly for who he really is." Over the next week, we prepared everything. Mason's firm set up a front company, Carter Redevelopment Group, posing as an investment partner looking to rebuild the hardware business under new management. I let it leak, through a trusted mutual friend, that I was the silent backer. The bait was irresistible. Sure enough, 2 days later, my phone rang. "Alex," Dad said stiffly. "I hear you're willing to talk." "I am," I said. "Meet me at my office Friday morning." He tried to sound composed. "I appreciate you doing the right thing. Family sticks together, after all." "Always," I said. When Friday came, I had everything ready. The conference room was prepped with a full presentation, Mason waiting in the next room with 2 lawyers and a financial auditor. There were cameras, hidden but legal, recording everything. At 9:02 sharp, my father arrived in a wrinkled suit, still trying to look important. Mom followed, quiet and nervous. "Quite the setup," he said, eyeing the glass table in city view. "You always did like a show. This one's for you," I said, gesturing to the screen. He sat down. "Let's hear it." I clicked the remote. A sleek slide deck appeared. Projections, charts, mock-ups of new stores. "Carter Redevelopment Group," I explained, "wants to acquire your remaining assets and relaunch under modern branding. You'd be listed as an honorary consultant. Ethan could stay involved as a regional manager, and you'd get a signing bonus of $400,000 to start." His jaw tightened slightly. "Honorary consultant. It's just a title," I said casually. "They need someone to represent the family legacy." He looked suspicious. "Why would they offer this?" "Because of me," I said. "They trust me. They know I can guarantee results. But there's a condition." He crossed his arms. "Which is, you'll need to sign a public acknowledgement, confirming your prior misconduct, apologizing for the forged documents, and admitting you misused my name without consent. That statement will be part of the legal record." His face turned red instantly. "Absolutely not." "Then there's no deal." He stood up, shaking. "You think you can humiliate me? Make me crawl in front of the world?" I leaned forward, calm. You already did that to yourself. He slammed his hand on the table. I built this family. You'd be nothing without me. At that moment, Mason walked in with the lawyers. Mr. Carter, he said smoothly, we've already reviewed your financial history. You're not being offered a partnership. You're being served. The look on my father's face was almost disbelief, that slow dawning of realization that the power he'd clung to was gone. The lawyers placed a thick folder in front of him. This includes documentation of your forgeries, fraudulent transfers, and fabricated valuations. You'll have the chance to avoid criminal prosecution if you sign and cooperate. For the first time in my life, I saw him speechless. He looked at me, eyes wide with fury and panic. You set me up, he whispered. I met his gaze evenly. No, Dad. I just finished what you started 22 years ago. You wanted to teach me how the world works? Lesson learned. He slumped back in his chair, breathing heavily. Mom's hand trembled as she tried to touch his arm, but he brushed her off. I hope you're happy, he spat. You destroyed your own blood. I stood. No. You destroyed it the moment you thought blood meant ownership. The lawyers escorted him out after he finally, angrily, signed the papers. I watched through the glass wall as he left, smaller than I'd ever seen him. The man who once towered over me was now just another old businessman, broken by his own arrogance. After they were gone, Mason turned to me. You know, that was brutal. Beautiful, but brutal. I exhaled slowly. I didn't want revenge, I said. I wanted closure. But I guess sometimes they're the same thing. The next morning, headlines exploded across the business circuit. Carter patriarch admits fraud in shocking public statement. Son clears name and acquires assets. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. The story told itself. In one stroke, my father's legacy became my lesson. A public reminder that the boy left behind on the highway grew up to build his own road. And this time, nobody could take the wheel from me. The fallout came fast, faster than even I expected. By Monday morning, the news had spread beyond our town. Regional outlets picked it up, then national ones. Disgraced businessman confesses after son uncovers decades of fraud. The headlines all told the same story. A father who built his empire on deceit, and a son who brought the truth to light. My phone buzzed endlessly that week. Journalists, lawyers, former classmates, even old clients calling to say how proud they were. But I didn't feel proud. I just felt still, like the noise had finally stopped after years of living in a house with thin walls. Dad's reputation evaporated overnight. The state revoked his business license. Investigators raided what was left of the Carter warehouse properties, and the IRS came knocking soon after. Ethan tried to distance himself, publicly claiming he had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. But the investigators found emails linking him directly to the forged signatures. He wasn't charged, but he lost everything. His investors, his credit, his apartment. Mom called once more, maybe 2 weeks later. Her voice was small, trembling. Your father's sick, she said. The stress, the heart, they think it's serious. He won't talk to anyone. He just sits in the garage all day. I didn't say anything. After a long pause, she whispered, Do you hate us? I thought about that for a while. No, I said finally. I stopped hating you a long time ago. I just stopped caring. She started crying. I could hear her trying to speak through the tears, something about forgiveness, family, second chances, but I hung up before she could finish. There wasn't anger anymore, just distance, the kind you can't measure in miles. A month later, I drove out to the old rest stop on the highway, the same one where they left me all those years ago. It had changed, but not much. The gas pumps were newer, the sign repainted, but the shape of the road was the same. I parked, got out, and stood where 12-year-old me once sat with an empty soda bottle, watching taillights fade into the horizon. The air smelled the same, gasoline and wet asphalt. Back then, I'd stared down that road, waiting for someone to come back. Now, I stood there knowing no one ever would, and that it didn't matter. I walked over to a small patch of gravel near the curb, took out a folded piece of paper from my jacket, and placed it on the ground. It was the letter I'd written months ago, the one that started with, You told me being left behind would make me stronger. I weighted it down with a stone and stepped back. For a long moment, I just watched the cars pass by. Families on road trips, kids laughing in the back seats, headlights cutting through dusk. I wondered if any of them knew how fast a life could change, how a single cruel joke could echo across decades. As the wind picked up, The paper fluttered slightly under the rock. I didn't stay to see if it blew away. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a notification from one of the news sites. Carter Hardware Properties auctioned off. Assets acquired by private development firm. That firm was mine. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been taken, not the money, but the narrative. For the first time, the Carter name stood for something honest. A week later, I got a short letter in the mail with shaky handwriting. It was from my father. I didn't teach you much, but I guess you learned anyway. You won. Congratulations. No apology. No warmth. Just the last echo of a man who could never say the one thing I wanted to hear. I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and never opened it again. Months passed. My firm kept growing. The media moved on to newer scandals. My brother left the state. Mom sold the house. I didn't see any of them again. But sometimes, when I drove home late and the highway lights blurred past, I thought about that 12-year-old kid sitting by the curb, small, quiet, invisible. He waited for someone to come back. I never did, because I finally realized something. Some lessons aren't about surviving what people do to you. They're about proving they can never do it again. And that was the last lesson my father ever taught me.